story, which is my grandmother's story, which I did turn into a children's book. It's historical fiction, but it's based on my grandma's true story, and it's geared towards an interest level of around 7 to 12 years old, but the reading level is about 3rd grade and up. And last week we did the first presentation of this. That was the 112th anniversary of the flood. So we're just a week out of that. And it peaked on March 25th, 1913. So a little bit about myself. I'm a speech-language pathologist in the Hamilton City School District. I grew up in Hamilton as well, and I attended kindergarten at Lincoln, and then I went to St. Peter's from 1st grade through 8th grade, and then I went to Baden for 2 years, and I went to Hamilton High for 2 years, and then I got my bachelor's and master's degree from Miami University, so I'm local. Both sides of my family have lived in Hamilton since the mid-1800s. Most of the ancestors came from Germany, but a few of them did come from England and Scotland, a few of them from France, and just like everyone else in Hamilton, a few came from Kentucky. But most of my German ancestors lived right here in German Village. So just to clarify, I'm not an expert on the 1913 flood. I did a lot of research just trying to figure out all the pieces that I wanted to put in the book. I wanted it to be historically accurate. But if you want more information that's not here, this is a great resource. It really is. They've got video collections, pictures, old postcards, lots of information, lots of very knowledgeable folks. All right, so just out of curiosity, how many people here believe you are related to the family in the story? I know a few. All right, so last week there was about 12, I think. And then we didn't take a family picture. That was sad. Didn't even think about it. How many of you are educators or former educators? All right, good chunk. All right, and how many want to hear how to get your own book into print? Yeah, that's the same resource last week, one person. All right, well, we'll talk about that, though. And, it might inspire you to do it because it's not as hard as you think. All right. Did I do that already? Tell me if I'm not on track. All right, overview of today's presentation. So first thing we're going to do is listen to an actual recording made in 1982 of my grandma telling about her experience in the 1913 flood. She was 77 at the time that she recounted her story, but she was only 7 in the flood. And then we'll talk about how I researched the details from her story, the flood, the people involved, and my process of how I turned her recollection into a story that would be of interest to children. And then last, getting it into print. And we can go over that fast if nobody cares about that part. All right, that's my grandma Rosemary. Isn't she cute? Yeah. So she was born in 1905, and she died in 1994 when I was just 24 years old. So I don't know that we had this conversation a whole lot before she passed, but my Aunt Rosie did. She sat down at the kitchen table and she interviewed her about all kinds of things. She was the daughter of Joseph Vogt and Clara Anna Holbrook, and her siblings were Mame, Ferd, Leona, Lillian, Agnes, and Clara, and they lived right behind the Lane Public Library. Sort of like if you think about the parking lot right next to it, right there. Let's see. Now, while you listen to some of her story, which we're going to do next, some of the words that she says are going to appear on the screen. Okay, this is the first thing I did and the information that I had. So I transcribed everything, and those were all the details that made me go, I need to look into that more. I need to put that in the story. But while you listen, I do want you to try to visualize yourself as a 7-year-old experiencing this, because these words are from her memories as a 7-year-old. And think about how scary that would really be right here in German Village. All right, small spoiler alert, she did survive the flood. All right, now this is where I have to mute this.
We all went to school that morning. And finally they called and said everybody was dismissed because the heavy rains was causing slight floods. And boy, was it pouring down rain. we walked home, we got home, and the reports was out that there was going to be a flood. So Mom went down to Mame's. Mame lived at the other end of the street, right off of 4th Street. And so Mom went down there to help her get things upstairs because the water, the last time there was a flood, it never went past Mame's house. So while she was down there, Agnes says, they said there's going to be a flood, and if there's going to be a flood, we'll be stuck here and we won't have anything to eat. So she says, let's take everything that we got to eat upstairs. It was right after Easter. So we had Easter cake, we had Easter eggs, and we had some homemade bread that Mom had just baked. And then she took all the canned goods that we could find that Mom had canned out of the basement, and we carried them upstairs. So we never thought about clothing. We just thought about something to eat. So then finally, Mom came back, and she laughed at us, and she says, well, what did you do that for? The water never comes this far. It never goes any farther than Mame's. So Agnes says, well, Mom, they said that there's going to be a flood, and you don't know how bad it's going to be. So she says, we took food upstairs. If water don't get here, we can always carry it downstairs. So the longer we waited, the higher the water got, and it was coming down and coming down. Well, Mrs. Pfeffer and Tilly and the Carl lived in the other half of Mame's house. And Carl carried Grandma Pfeffer, and then Tilly, they came up to our house because they didn't want to be in the flood. And so finally the water kept coming up and up and up, and nobody could go anyplace. Pop was up at the malt house at 4th and Dayton Street, 4th and High Street, I mean. And Lillian was at Fitton's. That was where she worked up on 3rd Street. Leona was at work at Berkowitz cigar store on High Street. Well, she started home and she got across the High Street and she couldn't get any farther. So she was upstairs in that building. Ferd, I don't know where Ferd was. I don't remember where Ferd was. But anyhow, none of them were home. So we had Mrs. Pfeffer, Tilly Pfeffer, Carl, Agnes, Clara, and I, and Mom, and Pop. No, not Pop. Pop was up on High Street. And Mom. There was more than that there. Who else was there? Maybe Mame's family came down. There were 18 of us there in 2 rooms upstairs. And so water kept coming up and coming up and coming up, and the water got about 1 inch. It was about 1 inch from the water coming up onto the 2nd floor where we were. And we took shifts in sleeping. And sometimes there was 6 in a bed, 3 at the head and 3 at the foot. But Grandma Pfeffer, she sat in the chair by the window, and she never moved away from that window. She just sat there and prayed her rosary. And one day we heard somebody yelling, and they looked out the window, and it was the people in the other house. See, it was a double house, and it was people in the other house, and they was leaning out the window yelling, and they says, "Do you have anything to eat over there?" They said, "We have absolutely nothing. We haven't had anything for 2 or 3 days." And so they tied half a loaf of bread onto a stick, that they caught in the water, and a big long, like a pole, and they tied it on the end of that and reached it over to them at their window so they could have something to eat. And they had a half a loaf of bread between 3 of them. And so we didn't know how long it was going to last, and that water was so swift, it was taking everything with it. You'd see horses and cows and pigs and chickens and roofs and everything going down along the side of our house. But they never hit the house. We couldn't understand what was going on. Everything was going by us. But when the water started going down, we found out that, well, we knew that the great big shed, barn, not a shed, a barn was across the street, and that went down. And the roof flattened out, and the roof came over and hit our house. And we thought, here goes our house. But we never. And here there was gravel from over across the road washed up against our house to keep it, the foundation for the house from washing off of the foundation. And but then when the water started going down, then it went down pretty fast. Then Tilly and Carl and anybody that was able, except us kids, they went down and they just had to shovel the mud out of the house. And from years afterwards, we would still find the silverware in the backyard. If we would dig in the yard, we'd find a spoon, we'd find silverware and all that kind of stuff. And but we finally got outside, and we found out why our house was saved was on account of that gravel that piled up against the house, and it kept the house from going off of its foundation. There was 5 people dead in our block, that one block. There was 6 houses went down. 6 houses vanished. They found one man was sitting in a tree, but he was dead from exposure. And but they never did find the rest of the bodies. As far as I know, they never found them. Mm-hmm. There was a great big hole in the back of our house, in back of the library, and half of the library was gone. But we were just lucky enough that our house stayed put. So then, after the flood, and everything was all struck down, Pop says, we're going to build a house. We're not going to stay here any longer. So he bought the house from Tabler's across the road. Well, his grandmother. And Ferd drew the plans for the house, and they built the house just according to Ferd's plans, because he would like to work with that stuff. And he had some guy to help him dig out the basement, and another guy to help him with the carpenter work. But they done most of the work themselves, building that house. carpenter. He was working at the malt house, and every half hour they had to turn that malt over so that it wouldn't get too hot and steam. And that's what his job was up at the malt house. He made $5 a week. So as soon as he got the house built, we carried our furniture across the street and moved in. Lillian was the one that always cried. She wanted to move. She wanted to move. She didn't want to spend her whole life living in that one house. She wanted to move. Everybody else gets to move, but we don't get to move. So we moved across the street. But she was happy. We moved.
Can you hear me now? Now? Ah, okay. All right. All right, so she goes on, she talked for a while all about that, but she did talk about, what, next slide, sorry. How do I do that? Why isn't it doing it? It's not doing it. Tech support. No, that's my daughter. We need to come out of
We
the
all went to school that morning.
whole thing. There we go. All right. So at the end of that, she went on to describe how they had a back house or an outhouse because they had no sewer hookup, and they heated with gas and a coal stove because they didn't have electricity for several more years. And that Dr. Good, who lived right next door at the corner of 3rd and Linden, and that house is still there, he let them hook into their sewer sometime later after that. All right, so research. So when I started this, I really didn't even know where she lived. Like, I went looking, I'm like, let's go find her house. I didn't know which one it was. All right, so the first thing I did was I went on to the 1910 census, and you can see this says Linden Street in there, and there's the family, a little up close. At 317 Linden Street was Joseph, Clara, Ferd, Lily, Agnes, Clara, and Mary, which is Rosemary. And if you look right here next door, Tablers, I believe these are the people that shared the house with them, the other half of the house. That's cut off, but the mom and dad were 27, I think, or 24, and the daughter was 7 years old. Okay, so they were the people that they shared the bread with, as far as I can tell. And then a little bit zoomed out, so the old censuses used to ask, where were you born, where were your parents born? So Joseph and Clara, my great-grandparents, were born in Ohio, but you can see that their parents were from Germany, and that Joseph worked at a brewery, which she told us was Songen's malt house. So then on the same page, I was like, where did Mame live? I don't know where Mame lived. So that would be Charles Wolpert and Mary. Mary was Mame. And they had 2 kids. So Mame was her sister, and Mary and Leroy would be her niece and nephew. They lived at the other end of 4th Street, which was so far away, right? There's like never comes past there. I'll show you on a map in a minute just how far that is. And then she said Grandma Pfeffer and Tilly. So there's Matilda and Teresa Pfeffer. So they shared a house as well. All right. So then I went looking for these houses. Of course, 317 is not there. But if you look at the plot maps, it's the parking lot. Actually, I'm skipping ahead. Hold on. So then I went to look at the 1920 census, and they lived at 320 Linden Street, so across the street. And everybody but Ferd lived there at that point. Okay. So then you saw this picture in the, I should catch up here. You saw that picture in the video. This is actually of the new house being torn down to make more room, I'm assuming for parking. I don't know. Could be that the house wasn't up to code, if they just built it themselves. But if you look at this house right here, this is Dr. Good's house. That's the back of the house that faces 3rd Street. So they're probably standing in the parking lot of the library watching. I don't even know if these are relatives. I never identified. This was in the Journal News at some point, so I don't know. But if this little circle right here helped me get my bearings, I found the house. Yep, there's the little circle piece, and it's the parking lot of the library, which they're looking from right across the street at their house being torn down, or whoever. I don't know if those kids are relatives or not. All right. So here's Google Maps. So that's where 317 would have been, which is here's the library. And then right down there is where Mame's house was. The water never comes past Mame's. And so that confused me too. I'm like, the river's this way. Why is the water over there and it never comes past Mame's? Well, that is because, so here's the library, and that is the hydroelectric plant with the bike path, and this is Joe Nuxall baseball fields. Okay, that used to be the reservoir, which the water that fed the hydroelectric plant, and it was a recreational lake basically. Not a lake because it's part of the river, but you could rent boats, and there was all kinds of activities. You could take them out to a little island in the middle. So the water actually flooded all the time, which is why it never went past Mame's house. But you can see they're just right here to the water. It's really not far. That's where it came from first, flooding into German Village. And then there's a little bit more zoomed in. You can see where 5th Street is here. Okay, that at the very end was Pikey Luger's boathouse, which you saw that picture in there too. It wasn't actually a picture of the flood, it was a picture from the reservoir. He's actually a relative too, not a direct ancestor of mine, but a relative. I don't know, cousin of a grandpa or something, I don't know. But you can see how the water, there was actually a waterway that came up along 5th Street there all the way to Heaton. So there was a waterway that came here, and here's Mame's house. So that's where the water came from. Very close, very close. All right, but it must have flooded all the time. They were used to it. All right, then the Miami Water Conservancy, is that right? Miami Conservancy District, now I said it right. They fixed all of this, obviously, so that, because I'm thinking that river would be flooding here right now, today, if that hadn't been fixed. This was that view of Pikey's boathouse. So you can see Beckett paper in the background over there. This was normal water. He rented these canoes out. You could just, tool around. I'm sure it was very safe to tool around on that. And he lived right there at the end of 5th Street. All right, so some of the facts that I had to fill in for myself. The flooding started on Monday, March 24th, the day after Easter. A telegram had been sent to Hamilton from, I believe, Oxford, that was actually an error from the day before, saying that the dam in Dayton had broken and this great flood was coming. So somebody came in to work the next day, found it still laying on the table, sent it to Hamilton. It was incorrect, but they closed school and sent the kids home, which was a good thing. And they were told to run for the hills. Tell everybody you see on your way home, run for the hills because a big flood is coming. So then at 10 o'clock, all 4 bridges were closed because the water was so high. And at 12:12 in the afternoon, the Blackstreet Bridge went down. And then the High Street Bridge went down at 12:28. Then the train bridge. So the railroad stopped operating that day, but they parked a bunch of rail cars full of coal on the bridge thinking that'll hold it down. And so those went down into the river too. It didn't work. And then 2 a.m. the Columbia Bridge went down. And there was I didn't say this the other night, but there was a sports coliseum in Hamilton on A Street, I believe. And that had washed away, and I think that's what took out the Columbia Bridge. I believe that's correct. Don't quote me on that one. All right, so the full force of the rampaging river hit Tuesday morning, March 25th, and all telephone and telegraph contact was lost by that morning. The river crested on Wednesday the 26th, and within 48 hours, the river had risen from 4 feet to an all-time high depth of 34 feet. I looked this morning. They must measure it differently now, because I looked this morning, like, how high is the river today? Because it's so high. And it said 74 feet. I'm like, so I don't know if if it's different now because they've done it or something. But then it fell back to 25 feet on that Thursday and under 20 by that Friday. So it went down pretty quickly after that. But there was filthy, contaminated pools of water in most parts of the city for months. Hamilton had little warning because of lack of communication, so that telegram that went in was probably one of the main things. Sounds like they were a little bit used to having floodwaters, but nothing like this. Next slide, sorry. And the engineers had said that the ground was already so saturated that everything that just kept coming down was just going straight to the river. Okay, 87% of it went straight to the river. And they think that Butler County got 8.5 inches of water over those 3-4 days. I think we were forecasted to get 8 inches of water over the next, I don't know how much we actually got, but so it was a very similar situation. There had been tornadoes across the plains for a couple of days, and then just deluge of rain for days. So it's really very similar to what happened these last couple days. So we might have had to have postponed this because this might be underwater. And there's actually, I don't know if you've ever been upstairs, there's a water line from the flood you can see on the wall still. Pretty impressive. All right. So, writing the story. So there's plenty of resources out there on this topic for adults, but there's really not for kids. Kids today don't even know that that happened. You know, people my age do because our grandparents talked about it, but not for kids. Let's see. But today's kids do need to know that this happened at some point. It's part of their history. So, you know, I knew that the audience for this book was going to be family and anybody who grew up in Hamilton, okay? Oh, and also the reading level of everything you find on the internet is more like it's geared towards adults. It's not really for kids. So that was my goal there. But kids love survival stories and heroes. And with age-appropriate stories, kids can learn about traumatizing events without being traumatized themselves. They can learn what it feels like to be a hero. They can problem solve when they identify with a character. They can learn to stay strong when things get tough and to overcome adversity. And kids love mysteries too. So did you hear the part where Rosemary said, my grandma said, they were digging up silverware for years in their own backyard? So that was sort of my plot twist, I suppose. I'm like, let's gear it around silverware. And it sort of connected the past to the present for them. And I chose historical fiction for kids because and this story has heroes, survivors, mystery, and a little bit of humor. All right, so which parts are historical and which parts are fiction? Sometimes the kids are like, they find out the spoons were made up. And they're like, what? I'm like, I'm sorry, they are. But it's based on that they found spoons in their backyard. So if it's in the audio, consider it true that my grandma said it. That's her story. If she didn't actually say it, that's in my version of the story. It was probably added in based on historical facts. I wanted to put as many historical facts in there about what happened. And some things I just had to take some liberties and add in to make it a fun story. But since she told it from her perspective as a 7-year-old, she became a main character. And she had already given me a lot of good details and scary moments. I didn't really have to add a whole lot. All right, so the back of the book, I'm just going to read this, and I'll describe it a little bit better in a minute. So while treasure hunting near his house, a 10-year-old boy finds an artifact from long ago that sparks his curiosity. While researching his artifact, he learns a piece of his town's history and a story of danger and fear for a young girl and her family. 100 years prior, a young girl finds herself in the midst of the worst natural disaster to ever hit her town. Can she and her family stick together and survive? Based on a true story, this book tells the experience of a resident of Hamilton, Ohio during the Great Flood of 1913 and gives children currently living in Hamilton a glimpse into the history of their hometown. All right, so how did I get from A to B? So in September of 2020, we all know what was going on then. We were on a 4-hour road trip to visit some relatives. So that's when I transcribed my grandma's story. Just listen to it, type. My husband was driving. I was not driving. And I put it in just to a Google Doc, just typing it. And as I was typing, I was brainstorming ideas, and it was really a mess. This thing had just ideas and notes all over it. But once I got my initial ideas down, I really kept working on it, and I was getting more excited about it, thinking, oh, I can connect this to that. So I just kept adding details, and I worked on it here and there through January. Okay, so about 4 months. I also had a job, so whenever I had time. All right, so the story starts out in the present day, right here in German Village, with a 10-year-old boy named Ben who gets a metal detector for his birthday. He was using his metal detector in his backyard, which is Dr. Good's house. We don't find that out until about the middle of the story, though. He dug up a very old spoon that said rosemary on it. He didn't really know what he had until a man from the Butler County Historical Society happened to see it and was intrigued. He suspected it was an artifact from the flood because he also had a spoon with a name on it that said Lily. And his spoon had also been dug up in the area as well. So they went on a little tour of Hamilton as the man told him about the flood and helped him do some research as the mystery emerged as to who Rosemary and Lily were. Now, funny story, the week before I actually got it published, I changed the name of the man at the Butler County Historical Society because I had a man who used to work here a long time ago, and I was like, probably shouldn't use his name. I don't have his permission. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to pick just an everyday name like Mr. Smith. And the week I got it, Kathy Cretin, who used to run this place, was retiring. And so I brought a copy of the book over to her as a retirement gift. And they said, well, she's not here right now. She's at the bank with Mr. Smith. He's taking over for her. So, coincidences. It was meant to be. All right. So then a new chapter transports us back in time to 1913, just days before the flood. So now Rosemary's the center of the story, which describes her going to school and church at St. Stephen's, introducing her family characters, and how her Grandma Vogt, who was a German immigrant, had given all the kids a silver spoon from Germany with their names engraved on them. That's where the kids are like, So then the rain started, and then when they were sent from school, the children were told to tell everyone they saw to run for the hills because a great flood was coming. The hills being Poorhouse Hill and Prospect Hill. Is that the right name? Over by Champion. Let's see. So it was documented in the newspapers that the children were the ones saying, run for the hills, run for the hills. I don't know if it was Rosemary or not, but she said they were sent home from school, so it was her. So we've got our first heroes, right? And then the story goes on as they took the food upstairs while they waited for Mama to come. More heroes. And as the flood kept getting worse, her brother Ferd goes off to rescue some people in a rowboat. Another hero. She did say she did not know where Ferd was, but people were rescuing people in rowboats. Several chapters are going on now, taking place in the upstairs of their house, and Ferd is using a spoon to reach for a long stick floating by so he can get that stick to share bread with the neighbors who were hungry. More heroes, right? Bravery, kindness. But when he was reaching for the stick, he dropped the spoon in the floodwaters. So now we know how it got there. Rosemary's unaware of what happened to her favorite spoon. She was looking for it later in the book, but there was no reason for her to be mad at Ferd because she didn't even know that he was the one, he was reaching for a stick with it. All right. So then, remember she was talking about Grandma Pfeffer, which wasn't actually her grandma. But she was 7, so she probably called her that. So the story tells of the sounds and smells and the scary sights from their window. Pop shared some information he saw and heard while he was up on High Street before he made it home to the house, before the waters peaked. One story he told them was how Dobbin, the blind horse, was swimming aimlessly down High Street, which was true, and that he was put in the courthouse with other horses from town, including the fire department's horses. They were put in the courthouse to keep them safe. In the book, the Holbrook brothers saved him. They're relatives of mine, too. They had a store, Holbrook Brothers, up on High Street. So I don't really know who saved Dobbin, but that's the way it is in the book. It's possible, right? All right, so then the The story goes back to the present time, back to the Historical Society, and they help him find, they help Ben find one of Rosemary's living relatives. She had 10 children, and they meet up with her. So this is, theoretically, is Rosie, Rosemary's daughter, Rosie, my Aunt Rosie. And so they found her, and they met up with her. And he chooses to do the right thing. He gave his treasures to her, and to show her gratitude, she lets him listen to the recording that you just listened to, because she's the one that made the recording in real life. So she had it. And so there's also in the back of the book, there's a link to hear that recording too. So this is a cleaned up version of the recording. There's actually the original recordings on the Colligan page, Voices from the Past. It just had all of the chatter going on at the table that they were talking and just having a good time. And somebody was sewing in the background. If you record your family telling their important stories, don't sew on the sewing machine in the background. So I cleaned it up a little bit, took out some of the laughing and jokes and whatever, but unrelated types of things. All right. So then from January to May 2021, so a year and a half, I would use it with my students. Some of my students, they were doing online school. They weren't even coming to school at first. So, trying to do that was interesting. So we were teaching vocabulary and story comprehension. So I used this story. I could put it right up on the screen and they could see it. And so it was really nice because, okay, they're learning about their history. They're learning the vocabulary. But also it helped me see which parts were confusing or that they couldn't read so that I could fix them up a little bit. So then I also had family and friends read it. And it was literally still in a Google Doc. It was just like, you print it all out and here it is. So they were like, yeah, that's cute. So from May 2021 to May 2024, 3 years, I would occasionally try to reach out to a publisher, like how do I get this thing into as a real book? Tried to find people that were interested in drawing pictures or creating the pictures. I found some teenagers who were really good in art. They would say, yeah, I want to do that. And I'd let them read the story, and then I never heard from them again. And I told them, I'm like, I can't pay you a lot because I'm really not going to make much money on this, but I can pay you something. But then they just wouldn't reach out. So I was stuck, and it was going nowhere. And that is an actual picture of me. I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. So Mother's Day last year, my daughter's in the front seat here. Should I make you stand up? Allison, for Mother's Day, she gave me this picture, and she said, I think we can get it published, and I'm going to do this for you. And she had the cover all designed already. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. She had already worked on a bunch of pictures using AI art. This is all new. It may not even existed 4 years ago. It probably did. I don't know. But she found a way to do it. So she created it on Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. Okay, publish it yourself. If you can't find anybody to do it, you publish it yourself. I had never heard of it before, but it took us about a month. She had already worked on it for a while, but about a month to get it fixed up. She didn't want to do it without my permission, and that was the right thing to do, even though she already had it all figured out. So she really didn't need me. But we used AI to make pictures, and that's a really great resource, but you do have to look at them because you type in what you want the picture to look like. You could say, a 7-year-old girl standing in floodwater in 1913, looking scared, whatever you want. And then choices come up and they're amazing, but she might have 3 arms. There might be a person in the background that doesn't have a head. So you have to really look at them. So we took some of the pictures that were really good, except for some of the pictures were weird, and then we photoshopped them. And we'd take an arm out or something. All right, let's see. So after you upload it, Amazon checks it for about a week, and when it gets approved, it goes live, and you can sell them. It's pretty amazing. So I'm going to show you how to do that briefly, in case you really want to do this. So you go to Kindle Direct Publishing, which is an Amazon company. It's a free program. There's literally zero out of pocket. They don't pay me to say this, but there was no money to put out at this point. You download a template, and she's going to tell me if I'm saying this wrong, because really she did this part. You download the template on what you want, what kind of book you want. And then you could type your story there. I didn't. Mine was in a Google Doc, so she had to upload it all and then fix it, like put it in the right format, some of it. But you can type it right in that template. That way when you're ready, it's already there. You set the cost of your book. It can be sold directly through Amazon, but they get a cut of it, of course. Fair, it's their program. Or you can buy your own copies, plus shipping. They will send you a W-9 that you have to claim on your taxes for whatever you make on there. So, but that's okay. Let's see. So there's a picture of what the website looks like. You choose what kind of book you want it to look like ahead of time. Let's see. You can pick your paper, the color, you upload whatever pictures. All the pictures that were in this slideshow, very few of them were ours. Like the two little cute little girls, that was my grandma and her sister Clara. Like the 19-year-old looking girl, that was my grandma. But the flood pictures, all but one, was the flood picture of her house in there, where it said Mom's house. All the rest of them were just flood pictures that we put in there. Except for Grandpa Vogt he was shoveling. That was actually them building the new house. It was at the time we were talking about songs, and it looks like he's shoveling the malt, but actually he's building the new house. Or shoveling mud, I don't know. All right, creating pictures with AI. There's a lot of free apps out there where you can do this. But if you want a better one, of course you can pay for a better app, and they have more options on there. So if you're serious and you're getting down to you really want to do that, I would just pay for a little bit of a better resource. You can just type in a description of what you want, and dozens of options pop up. It's really amazing. My recommendations. Figure out the size and format of the book you want first and download the template first. I already said that one. Let's see. Write your book there. I already said that too. See, like I'm ahead of myself. Oh, my biggest recommendation is get someone under the age of 35 to help you, because they can do a lot faster. Like you're frustrated and whatever, and they'll be like, really? So that's my biggest recommendation. So that is all I have. How did I do on time? All right. Does anybody have any also this. So this is a friend of mine. I didn't know she did this before I published it. And then she's like, do you know that I do this for a living? So hadn't seen her since high school. She reached out to me. She has a service basically helping people get their books published on Amazon. So if you need help with that, she does that. There's a fee involved. I don't know what it is. But I did it myself, and, she could probably help you get there faster. Okay?